here. I'm right now lounging about in my kaftan. I completely love a kaftan. I don't know why they ever went out of style. They're amazing. I mean, it's basically a big blanket that accentuates your chest. Like during the pandemic when everybody was talking about, oh, I'm at home in my sweatpants, LOL, like you could have been really lounging in a giant comfy blanket and feeling glamorous at the same time. Like, I don't understand why they didn't catch on, why they didn't come back. It's a mystery to me. Frankly, I'm a little bit embarrassed for our society that they didn't come back, but I'm loving it. Today, I thought I would do another Stash Buster project and make a new one. Kaftans can be very, very complicated, or they can be super simple. This one is basically two rectangles sewn together. So that's what I thought I would do, is take this kaftan, copy the pattern, and make a new one that matches this. So I went through my stash, and what I have are two saris that my very favorite friend from New Mexico got me when she went to India several years back. Let's just say that. I've had these in my stash since then. I really wish I just had a place to wear saris to. So, you know, if anybody wants to invite me anywhere, I'm down. But also, you know, I don't have the correct, you know, blouse or underskirt for it. This is really just the outside part that you wrap around. The other thing too is, like this one especially, like you really need to have those under clothing. You know, you don't just wrap this around yourself, because this is so sheer. I mean, can you see me through it? Because I can see everything. But that of course makes super sense when you are in a place that is crazy hot. You don't want to have the thing that you're layering and layering over you to be very heavy. So I do have this. I really love it, but I don't have a need for a sari, and I do have a need for a kaftan that I can use as a beach cover-up. Because let's face it, this is not, it's not going to be safe for work if I try to jump onto a conference call on this thing. So I think that I'm going to do a beach cover-up. I do also have this one, which is gorgeous. It's this gorgeous teal with this gold trim. It's not as sheer as the other one. It's a little bit, but I don't know if you can see me. It's also very, very lightweight. But what I've decided to do, since I'm going to cut these apart and make them into a kaftan, that I wanted to use this blue one, this blue and white one, mostly because the two sides are the same. They're the same width. So I don't have to worry about how I cut it. I could just cut it straight across, use one side for one edge and the other side for the other edge, no big deal. This one, because of how it's meant to be folded, the edges are two different widths. So I'm thinking I might do like a really cute, I don't know, maybe border print skirt blouse situation. I haven't decided. And before anybody freaks out about me like cutting apart these saris, these are, you know, what they sell to tourists, okay? They're not super fancy, you know, ceremonial garments. This is the equivalent of those I Heart NY t-shirts that somebody sells you on the streets of New York and you're not quite sure where they came from and they're suspiciously cheap. That's what we're talking about here. And so, you know, there's some really gorgeous detailing here that I really think would make a very, very nice something else, you know, in this case a kaftan. That way it gets used, it gets out of my stash, it can get appreciated, and I'll have a really nice loungewear item that I can use and continue living my glamorous kaftan life. So as you can see, my black kaftan is laid out on this table. It is really just a couple of big rectangles. I'm going to measure this out so I can reverse engineer this into this blue and white one. As you can see, the blue and white one is wider than the black one is, but that's going to be totally fine because it just means that the sleeve section is going to be slightly longer, so it'll be a little bit of a longer sleeve, but no big deal. All right, so looking up close at the caftan, so you can see this is the sleeve that we're going to extend. Then there is kind of this V-neck cut out of it. And if you look, you'll see that there's actually, it's just finished off very simply inside. Sorry, my camera does not want to focus on the black on black. It has a little belt right there. The sleeves really just have basic sleeved all the way down the edge and left open for the armhole. If you look at it from the inside, this was the belt, and you can see the ties are actually on the inside because that's what gives it the shaping, but then allows it to still have that nice blousiness. So now I just got to take some measurements and we can see what's going on. Like I said, caftan is basically just a square. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a me. This is my very good drawing of a person. And I'm going to draw a great big rectangle. Okay, so I know that I am 5'2" and I want it to hit just at my ankle level. So what I've done is I've measured from my shoulder to my ankle, and that was 52.5 inches. And then to give myself some seam allowance, that means I'm going to have to cut it 54 inches long. And then the width of the actual fabric is this 44.5 inches, and I'm just going to leave it because the blue edges are finished off. So that means that I need to cut out 2 rectangles that are 54 inches long by that 44.5 inches wide. The other thing I have to do now is figure out that V-neck and how I want to do that. So on the black one, it was kind of, there was the V and then a little bit that went over to the shoulder, and then it came down, and then that was what was gathered into the belt. So the shoulder section was about 4 inches on each side, and the V-neck went really low on the black one. I want it to be a little bit higher, so I want it to go down 4 inches until it tucks into the belt. So all in all, I'm going to need from my shoulder to the belt to be 13 inches, and then the belt, I want it to be 10 inches wide, but that means that it needs to be 15 inches wide so it can gather into that 10 inches. So those are the measurements that I want based on me and how I want it shaped on me. So that means I'm going to need to cut out a square that is 14 inches long by 16 inches wide, and that gives me 1/2 inch seam allowance on each edge. Okay, so now that I know that I want my little front center belt thing is going to be about 10 inches, and that's where all of that gathering is going to go into. So now I need to figure out, okay, what do I want to do for my belt? So it needs to be about 10 inches by about 2 inches. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it over so that it's doubled. That gives it an extra little bit of reinforcement there. But then I also need to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So it's going to need to be 5 inches wide and 11 inches long because that's going to give me the 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. And then I need to cut out my little belt straps that are actually going to be what I tie it, how I tie it in the back. And so they need to match up to the belt. So I'm going to make them 5 inches wide, just like how I'm going to cut out the belt. That way I can fold them over and sew them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like I am doing with the little center belt thing. And I want them to be about 36 inches long. I figure that'll just give me plenty of room to tie it and whatever I need to do. So I need to cut out 2 of those. And now I have all of the pieces that I need planned out so I know exactly how I need to cut my sari apart. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut an 11-inch long section of my border. Now my border is 5 inches wide, which is what I had already planned. Now I kind of planned it so that I could just go ahead and cut the border straight and then fold it in half. If you are not using a border print or whatever else, you might just have to end up cutting two pieces of fabric and putting them together. It's really whatever works for you and your fabric. I was being lazy and I decided to just use what I had so I didn't have to do any more cutting and sewing than was necessary. So now I'm just matching up the white section and oh, will you look at that? It's exactly the length that I decided I wanted my belt to be. Yay! Again, this whole thing was really just planned so I could do the least amount of cutting whatsoever. So I just need to cut two 5-inch wide strips of this doubled over white fabric, and that will give me the length of my two belt straps that I need to do. Okay, so now I just need to cut out the rectangle for that front bodice section that I had measured out, that I need it to be 16 by 14 inches. I don't want any of the blue on that section, so I just need to trim away just enough blue. And remember, this is based on, just what I copied over from my caftan. Feel free to play around with it. This is for you. So I've cut out my front and back pieces. So everything is cut and ready to go. So this is what it's going to look like. There's going to be the bodice section that's going to gather into the front belt piece. And then there is the two side waist ties that are going to connect to that, and that's going to be how you tie it around your waist. So I'm going to do the easiest part first, and that's just sewing the side straps. I'm just going to do a quick finger press to get them halfway, and then I'm going to mark off a 1/2 inch seam allowance toward the end. Usually if it's a 1/2 inch or something, I just mark it off on my machine, but I want to make sure that I get this really nice 45-degree angle here. So I'm just going to mark that off on the edge, and then I'm just going to go ahead and sew it right through on my machine, fold it over in half with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now once I get to the end, there is the blue seam line that I had made before, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm stitching right down there. I'm going to go right until where the two lines intersect, and then I don't need my seam guide anymore because I just want to make sure that I am stitching directly down that blue line. I'm going to do that and then lock the stitch there at the end. And that one is all sewn. Once both of these straps are sewn, then all we need to do now is trim the seam allowances back. That way when we flip them inside out, we don't have a bunch of bulk and that they'll lay nice and flat. So once it's sewn, turn it right side out. It can take forever if you're not using anything. It's certainly an option because it is wide enough. But I'm lazy, so I chose instead to use this tube quick turn. I have a 1/2 inch wide one, and because the fabric was so light and sheer, I figured it was fine. So it's really easy to use these. You just drop the tube part into the tube, basically, that you just sewed, and then you take the stick and you shove it up the tube, and that forces the fabric to go right side out. So I really like these. They're a really good option. They're super fast, and then you just do. Yeah, so much faster than doing it manually. And then once you get that done, I just do a quick little check on the corners. If you have a point turner, this is a good time to do that. You just got to feed it all the way through, but not a big deal. And just make sure that the points are nice and crisp. So now you just need to iron these flat, making sure that you get the seams rolled out really well, because you want this to have a really nice crisp edge. And then after that, we're going to just iron all of the other pieces so everything lays nice and flat.
And then we just got to serge the edges and they'll be all ready to start putting together. The nice thing about going selvage to selvage is that I don't have to worry about finishing these edges. And I'm just going to sew it on a 1/2 inch seam allowance so that gold will show right there at the edge. So I'm just going to finish off my raw seams. You can see they're already starting to fray really, really bad. So I'm just going to go ahead and go on each piece that I have cut out, and any raw edge, I'm going to go ahead and serge it so that way it doesn't unravel as I'm sewing it. Don't forget to do the little edges of the pieces that you cut out, especially for me, this trim, it was really loosely woven. And so even though it was the edge and it does have one side that is selvage, the other sides really, really needed to also be serged. Now that all the pieces are prepped, it's time to start that center front section of the belt that's going to go into that inset bodice piece. So really it's just folding it right sides together, sewing it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then flipping the tube right side out. Give it a nice press so that it stays flat, and then set it aside so we can work on the other section of the bodice. This is the front bodice section, I guess you would call it, of the caftan. And I'm just going to put some marks on here. This is where I'm going to have my shoulder. Remember, I had wanted a 4-inch shoulder, but when you account for a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides, that's going to be 5 inches. So I'm just measuring 5 inches from each side. And then at the bottom, because it's going to be kind of like a V cut, so I need to find the center of the bottom. So I'm just going to do that and make a quick little mark. I want the center of the V to be about 4 inches above the belt that I just made. And so again, accounting for seam allowances, I'm going to measure about 5 inches up. The next step is just using my straight edge to connect the mark that I made for the bottom of the V with the marks I made at the shoulder. And once I cut that out, that will be my open V neck. Next, it's time to run 2 rows of gathering stitches along the bottom. Remember that we are going to gather this into that little belt piece that I made, and that'll help create some bust shaping. So I'm just doing a 5mm long stitch. I'm doing it at about 1/2 inch and like 3/8 of an inch away from the seam allowance. Straight off the machine, it actually looks like the gathers are pretty close to what I need, so I just need to do a little bit of adjusting, and then I will pin it down and run it through the machine. One of the lines of gathering rows is about 1/2 inch, so I'm going to do this a little bit more than a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And a quick check just to see that the gathers look pretty even. It doesn't look like they are, super chunky in one area. They look pretty evenly distributed. I've ironed all the seam allowances down toward the blue portion of the waistband, so when it's all folded, it'll be totally hidden. Now I'm just taking the belt straps that I made earlier, and I'm going to put them at the edge of the blue waistband area. And because this should be measured correctly, if I hold that there, fold up a 1/2 inch, and then fold the whole thing over, the belt strap will be completely enclosed and there will be no raw edges to the belt area. I'm going to pin that down and then do the exact same thing to the other side. Tucking the excess down all along the top right at that gold border. Matching up the seam allowances as close as possible. Back at the machine, I'm going to do an edge stitch up the one side, making sure to catch the belt strap, and then I'm going to pivot at the corner, go all the way across so that the top edge of the waistband gets sewn together, and then back down again on the other side, making sure to catch the other belt strap. This is the back side of the caftan. And remember, you don't want it to be completely straight across the back because then it's going to kind of ride up on your neck and fold and rub and all kinds of weird stuff. So I'm just measuring in 5 inches from the folded center, and then I'm going to go down 1 inch I just want a nice curve connecting the 2 points that I just made. I'm using a French curve. If you want to eyeball it, you can eyeball it. It's really not a big deal at this point. Once you have your curve marked, go ahead and just trim it away. When you open it up, the curve might not look like much, but remember you're going to fold this over in a double hem. So usually I do about 1/4 of an inch and then fold it over another 1/4 of an inch. And then you're going to see that nice kind of round curve. The front is a little bit more difficult because we have to prep it to insert that bodice piece that we built earlier. So the bodice piece is going to be 15 inches wide across the top. So remember, we have to account for seam allowances. So we want a 14-inch wide opening across the top. So I'm going 7 inches on the fold to make sure that it's nice and centered. And then I know that that's going to be 14 inches wide. And this rectangle is going to go down 15 inches from the top edge. So I'm just going to make sure everything is nice and straight. Measure down 15 inches using the cut that I made as a guide and take out that entire corner. I've sewn the bottom of the blue belt to the opening of that rectangle that I just cut in, just along the bottom part. Next, we're going to take the vertical edge of the bodice piece and pivot the opening of the rectangle that we cut out so that the vertical edges both match up and meet up at the top shoulder seam. Making sure to keep my belt straps out of the way, I'm going to sew these from waistband to shoulder with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. To connect the front and back pieces of the caftan, I have pinned all along the top to keep it nice and straight, but I am not going to be sewing straight across the top because we do have that open neckline. So what I'm going to do is sew from the edge of the blue kind of selvage sleeve portion to where I have the opening of the V-neck. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this with the 1/2 inch seam allowance that I have been using for the rest of the caftan. I've decided I want my sleeve opening about 9 inches, I guess, deep. So I've measured 9 inches from the top of the shoulder, and I've just made a little mark here with my pin, and I'm going to just sew there to mark the bottom portion of my sleeve, and then I will pivot the entire thing and sew it down to the bottom with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I have sewn both sides of my caftan, so now I just need to finish these sleeve openings. I have folded them back on the selvage so that you can see that gold piping kind of peeking through. And now I'm just going to feed this through my machine with an edge stitch. Since this is cut on the selvage, there's really not a lot that needs to be done. I'm just going to edge stitch it so the selvage doesn't kind of roll out. I don't want anybody to see it. For the bottom hem, I just folded it up 1/4 of an inch and then another 1/4 of an inch so that the serged edge was completely enclosed. Technically, I guess I didn't need to serge the bottom of this, but I'm glad that I did because it kept it from fraying while I was sewing, and also it'll help give a little bit more weight and stability to the bottom of the hem.
So here is my caftan. It is almost completely done. Very nice, very comfy. As you can see, it is very, very sheer. I'm going to wear this over a bathing suit. I'm just not wearing the bathing suit right now because it's not complete yet. That is on my to-do list as soon as I fix up the neckline on the caftan. I did the same style of hem that I did along the bottom, but what I failed to take into account is that this is on the bias right here where it's a triangle cut. And just being on the bias and plus being this really, really loose weave, it completely stretched out of place. So what I've decided is that I need to reinforce it. And I just found some gold spools of ribbon from my stash. So I'm going to just use that and just kind of fold it over with a quick little blanket stitch. I had considered using some more of the scrap of this edging, but it is so thin and loose weaved that I figured it would just be more problem than it's worth for something so small. Plus I think this will give a nice little like gold necklace kind of vibe going on, so I think that'll look really cute. So as soon as I do that though, this will be 100% done and ready to wear to the pool. All right, I have got my gold neckline all pinned on. I have loaded up my machine with some gold thread that I had left over from an old Wonder Woman cosplay that I did, a million years ago. It was probably the first full dress I ever sewed. I am a little bit worried about putting this in the machine. For those of you who don't know, metallic threads can be really finicky. They get like really stiff, and they, generally when you're sewing, there's just kind of a natural twist that can happen. And because the metallic threads get so stiff, they don't allow that to happen naturally. They make it like really, really difficult. I'm just going to run this in here. I'm going to do a stitch all along this center line between like the metallic and the more satiny, and hopefully this goes smoothly. One last little detail before I'm done. I'm going to take the extra little tail of thread, and instead of snipping it off, I'm going to go ahead and thread it on this needle and use it to tack down that little pleated corner. It's just such a small corner right there at the very front V of the neckline. And just to keep it nice and flat, I'm just going to tack it down so I don't have a weird little floppy bit. And then that's it. This is going to be 100% done. I'm so pleased with how my kaftan came out. It was gorgeous and flowy and so comfortable. So hopefully this was helpful to you and you make your own. Thanks for watching.